Kira Kay is a traveler, in every meaning of the word. At the age of 25, she had achieved everything she felt she ever needed, and wasn't happy. So she asked herself the question, who am I? A question that started a lifelong journey that would lead her around the world, metaphorically and literally. That has led her to work with and alongside several respected teachers, to live in different countries and to have many varied experiences. Through self-exploration, she began to see her covered up hurts, her unconscious behavior patterns, limiting beliefs, fears, but more importantly, uncovered her strength, passions, her aliveness, and the ability to integrate these understandings and to truly live her life. On the way, she has come to understand that we all can truly see more than we generally believe. That's why she chose to explore the area of psychic ability and intuition with various teachers, both spiritual and mainstream, including indigenous elders. This way, she realized that intuition has been her gateway to uncover natural truths that are available to all of us at all times. And she started sharing her experiences and epiphanies with other people. Today, she splits her time between Australia, Europe and Nepal, where she runs a number of projects to support the local communities. We are very happy to have her with us today and welcome Kira Kay.
Hi Kira, thanks so much for having you and doing this interview for our Resilience video podcast. And so the question to me would be, given that resilience is quite a buzzword, what's your interpretation? What's your definition? How would you frame it, what resilience is all about?
First off, thank you for the invitation. And resilience is actually a topic that's been close to my heart for a much longer time, so I'm very happy to give my interpretation of it. May or may not be the same as everyone else using it as the buzzword. But for me, resilience is the ability to keep rising, no matter what is happening, whether it's a disaster, whether it's an internal crisis, an external situation, to be able to rise, to be able to face the day, face the situation and keep moving forward in whatever that might mean for the individual, the community, the country, the world, I guess, what we're facing at the moment.
Well, thank you. And before we go more into what resilience is all about, my question would be, what's the role that resilience plays in your work? Is it at the core of it? Is it rather a side aspect? How does it influence the work you do?
I would say resilience in terms of my working with, well, every context of my work actually, whether it's working individually with people to help them see themselves more clearly, whether it's group work, whether it's my work in Nepal, whether it's my work with communities, it's really a foundational point, which is why I'm so passionate about it. Because to me, if somebody has that ability to rise, well, what is it that helps them to rise? What is it that enables one person to, in the face of some adversity, some crisis, what is it that makes a difference that helps this person rise and someone else collapse and not be able to respond? So for me, this is a really key point, which I think is more to do with how we see ourselves, how we experience ourselves, and how we see our role in belonging, community, the world around us. So all of these things to me feel interconnected. So quite a big topic actually.
You already touched upon, let's say, some aspects, some different aspects of resilience, and so my next question would be, what in your view are the competencies, the capabilities, the aspects that make up resilience or help people to develop resilience?
I haven't looked at it specifically with those points in mind, but let me just think about that. I mean, I would say one of the core competencies is to know one's strengths and one's weaknesses. I think that's probably a big aspect. So that means that you know what you can give in terms of your strengths, but also you know when you might need to ask for help or to work with others where, well, to complement your strength or to compensate for where there may be a lack of experience or capacity. So that would be one, knowing strengths and weaknesses for sure. So know thyself, know thy community. I think that would be another one. Know what is in that world around you. You know, who are the people? What are the organizations? What is the geography, the lay of the land? I mean, this is also very important, whether that's externally and literally, but also, let's say, emotionally and energetically in terms of peoplescapes as well as landscapes. The ability to have empathy, the ability to be able to understand another person's situation that might be very different from my own. The ability to have compassion, which means to be able to have that just caring capacity for others who are in perhaps at times extreme stress and distress. And it's not necessarily that you want to sort of be fully empathic and go down with them, but the compassion is in a sense to help them to rise. So having another core strength, I would say, is also the stability in self. So that means that you've got the ability to find your own ground, literally and figuratively, to be able to hold out the hand to somebody else to help them to rise. Patience. I think dealing with complexity, I think patience and the ability to listen, to pause, to be able to have this wider view on the circumstance or the situation, again, externally and internally, but also internally within another person. Often in some form of crisis, the people concerned are often in a level of distress, so they're not going to be operating at their maximum capacity. They're probably going to be operating at their minimum. So having that patience and that, again, compassion to realize the complexity. I would say another competency is good communication and willingness to communicate. The willingness to communicate with people you might not ordinarily want to or choose to communicate with. I think another competency is intuition, which is again another one of my passions. How to access that wisdom or information that is not necessarily logical, but can be quite instantaneous. How to be able to respond in a situation from a comfortable, connected, intuitive place rather than freezing because, oh, I don't know what to do, no one's here to tell me, I don't know what, I don't have any information. But to have that developed intuition to say, okay, there's an unknown here, I'm comfortable with the unknown, I've looked into this uncomfortable, not knowing place many times, let me take a moment, drop in, okay, I need to do this or I need to call this person. So that competency is, I think, available if you've practiced it before the crisis happens. I'm sure there are other competencies, but that's the summary for the here now.
it's very interesting to see that you already build a kind of bridge between, let's say, the individual resilience and, let's say, the aspects of people interacting with each other. And one further question of mine would be, is there something like systemic resilience? How does resilience probably differ looking at the individual level and the interplay in teams and groups and tribes and organizations? What's your view on that?
I would add to your question, because, and this may jump already to the international side, and that is what I really notice is, let's say, more resilient communities often tend to be those that have gone or are going through a lot of adversity. So, for example, I'm in Nepal, as you will know, quite regularly, and have been working there in a supporting capacity for the last 20 years. And it's a country that suffers various types of natural disasters on a yearly basis. And sometimes very, very significant one like the earthquake in 2015. But every monsoonal time there is significant floods, landslides and so on. Additionally, the country is still fraught with a lot of poverty, so there's a lot of both individual and wider, let's say, challenges. And as a consequence, as a nation, as a community, there is more ability to respond to crisis because it's so frequent. Now, I'm not saying that we need to create more frequent crises for communities to rise, but I have noticed that that is a frequency, that when there is that more regular adversity, there is more ability for resilience. Also, I'm familiar in Australia and just witnessed it just recently in the floods in 2022, that in my local area, the local Indigenous community, who face a lot of adversity in a lot of different ways, they, as a, let's say, more subset of our community, were more resilient in the aftermath. And actually the Kuri male-led Indigenous organisation, it's a local independent Indigenous newspaper, they really led the response right after the floods in a very dynamic way, and have continued that in the months after. And their ability to rise was because they're familiar with dealing with difficult situations and the complexity of, homelessness and the various things that were faced after the floods. So I think some communities can have that systemically built in because they've faced adversity. And I do think it's something that we can build and we can develop. I think that takes initiative, it takes obviously leadership, so that's what comes back to the individual. So me as an individual can co-create, encourage, help to build resilience. But I would also say, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's also look for where resilience already exists. And that might actually be where we don't expect it. It might be in the underprivileged, let's say socioeconomic groups, and they actually might have more strength and more leadership to offer us than we might imagine.
Yeah, you already touched on it, and obviously it's a big gift for me and our listeners and viewers that you're living in different parts of the world, be it Germany or Nepal or Australia. And I wanted to know if there are any kind of, let's say, cultural differences or other aspects in the way that different people, different countries, societies deal with adversity or build resilience.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Felix, actually. The fact that I do live between 3 continents and consequently 3 very different cultures, with Germany, my sort of, let's say, adopted country, Nepal, which is a country of my heart, and Australia, which is my birth country. And each one of them has very different, let's say, basic cultures and also, let's say, historic issues which influence the culture that's present here today in 2022. With Germany, what I find is that there is, on the one hand, a strong base of community, and I'm living in the east part of Berlin. And so what I notice is that there is still a lot of East Berliners still present. For example, in my building, in my local sort of kits in the surrounding area. And I find that these people in particular are more likely to naturally build community. So within our building, where there are 8 apartments, we have much more collaboration, connection than some of my friends who live in the west of Berlin, where it seems people are more individualistic and not so naturally, let's say, having a house dinner or a picnic in the Hintergarten. And I find also there's much more reciprocating support. So if I need help doing something up on the ladder, that my neighbours are quite willing to come and help, for example. So I think there is a basis of community fundamentally in Germany, but it's been also fractured through the division that's happened after the Second World War. And another aspect is I see there's been a lot of family sort of fracturing as a consequence. And I notice that there's a lot of rebuilding and healing happening as the younger generations are happening. I'm finding that there's different questions, there's different energy. And so I feel quite invigorated by the younger generations and their way of being more globally connected and also not seemingly as caught into that historic past. I've noticed both with the wave of refugees, I think it was in 2015, 2016, and then most recently with the Ukraine war and the refugees, the response from a lot of people that I've witnessed in Germany, this willingness to open houses, to welcome people, to, in a sense, to compromise one's life to help others, which is a part of the resilience. If we cannot be resilient if I'm standing on a high mountain and I'm looking down and saying, well, I'll give you a piece of bread. It's more of like, no, well, okay, I'll go without so that you can have some too. This sense of, in a sense, coming to a more equal coexistence, we could say. So that I see is active and growing in Germany. In Nepal, it's different in quite a almost contra way. So fundamentally, there is still this deep embedded sense of community where, I've got my crops and everyone around will come together to harvest my crop. Then I go and, group by group, we all help each other harvest the crops. And the same with, disasters. It's like, okay, my house is still standing, so of course you all come and live with me for however long until we rebuild. And we rebuild, not you rebuild. And so there's much more of a basic sense of connectivity that is there. And with a younger generation now becoming more globally connected since only about 2010 that they've really had the internet. Mobile phones suddenly descended, and now we have a whole generation who are growing up with a more world view. And interestingly, they're now becoming more individualistic. So they haven't fully let go of that community way, but I notice that there is a change that is happening. So let's see what the future will evolve there. But fundamentally, I would say the sense of collaboration and communities embedded. In Australia, it's different again. We have the Indigenous communities, which I would say have a basis, a very strong basis of community and resilience by necessity, community by their origin, resilience and rising with adversity through necessity. There is also a lot of fracturing of the Indigenous community because of colonisation, and unfortunately that's still very relevant. But there's also a very strong rising of the Indigenous community and the movement of decolonisation, which as a white Australian I've been very inspired and touched and very, very happy to be also in my contribution part of that, but really led by my Indigenous friends who are just very inspiring on this topic, and I think can bring a lot to the rest of Australia's multiculturalism, where we are let's say the white Australia is not really that white because we have so many different cultures have settled into Australia, so it's a really hodgepodge. And that has both a positive as the younger people are blending and mixing, but there's also a lot of division as well, where there's little pockets where communities don't exist. The government still persists in having just English as the only language in disasters, and recently when we had major floods, there were people who really suffered terrible consequences because the warnings didn't come in other languages. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work where we can keep evolving in each place by actually having a conversation around resilience. What is it that can make our world a better place? What is it that can make us individually and collectively, let's say, healthier, more dynamic, more evolved with each other? I think, yeah, conversations like this, perhaps.
Super, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting to me. And so before we finish, I would like to ask you, because so far I placed all these questions, is there anything that I haven't touched on? I might have missed something you believe to be very important or inspirational for our listeners and viewers that I haven't touched on or asked. So is there anything you want to add that we haven't talked about yet?
So thank you for that invitation of perhaps bringing in things that I've not touched on, and perhaps some things that your listeners may not consider, perhaps in the resilience topic. One thing that I have observed and noticed concretely in dynamic situations of external disaster is that organisations such as the army, which some people might have like, ooh, army, don't want to be that involved with them, they can have a very functional and very timely response to a disaster and resources that the everyday people may not have. And I saw that in multiple different ways in the 2015 earthquake, both prior to the earthquake and also during and immediately after the earthquake. And I personally had my judgments and opinions against authority, and I've had to swallow that and realise that every aspect of society has its place and its role. So I would say, we can't exclude government, we can't exclude the military, we can't exclude, the police and local authorities. It's how can we all work together? And I think that is something I would love that all of us can contribute, because I do feel that then comes back to the individual. And that's the other part that I think is important, is to build resilience, we have to know our own judgments. We have to know our own limitations that come from our own thought processes, conditioning, belief systems. So how can we put them aside and have a wider and bigger picture? How can we be more inclusive of ourselves, our brothers and sisters, our wider society? So that is something I think I would sort of add to the conversation, and to know our own blinkers and just see if we can drop them a bit. I know for me that has been actually quite life-changing and has significantly helped me then to be more available in my communities.
Well, thank you so much again for having you today. To me that was really, really inspiring, and also getting this different view, given that you're living in kind of 3 different cultures on 3 different continents. So thank you, and hope to see you soon, and maybe welcome you again for another conversation in the future. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Felix.